Consider a concept that might challenge long-held beliefs at first glance. For the majority of your life, the cultural narrative dictated that dairy consumption translates directly to skeletal strength. Pour a glass, drink up, and secure your health, the advice went. Genuine physiological logic underlies that core message, yet a crucial nuance remains largely ignored. Past your sixth decade, consuming large volumes of standard milk might not deliver the skeletal reinforcement you anticipate. For a segment of the population, the calcium contained within can migrate toward highly undesirable anatomical structures. Rather than fortifying your framework, it can accumulate within your vascular walls. Reflect on that physiological reality momentarily, as the point here is not to label dairy a toxin. The recommendation is not to discard your groceries, but rather to understand a far more practical piece of biological data. Utilizing plain dairy independently in your later years represents only 50% of the physiological equation. The neglected portion dictates the precise anatomical destination of that ingested mineral. Growing up in the United States meant being surrounded by ubiquitous advertising campaigns and public health slogans. A simple carton of milk was equated with an indestructible skeletal system, and that concluded the discussion. Consequently, you incorporated it habitually into your routine. You added it generously to your morning breakfast bowl. You consumed it in the evening under the impression that it promoted high-quality rest. None of those choices indicate a lack of discernment on your part. You simply executed the precise strategy you were systematically educated to follow. The health preservation instinct was entirely sound, but the foundational data was fundamentally incomplete. From a commercial standpoint, fractured information is highly lucrative. A highly streamlined basic message moves far more inventory than a nuanced, multi-layered scientific truth. Corporate entities rarely generate revenue by explaining the hidden secondary mechanisms to the public. Allow me to provide the comprehensive context that a brief, rushed clinical visit rarely accommodates. Let us outline the conventional wisdom objectively and with genuine merit, because the premise is logical. The foundational theory assumes that because skeletons are composed primarily of minerals and dairy is highly mineral-dense, consumption naturally drives density. Every single element of that conceptual chain appears instinctively sound, and when isolated, each premise is factually correct. Dairy contains substantial mineral content, skeletal frameworks require it, and chronic deficits correlate directly with compromised structural integrity down the road. Up to this point, the logic remains entirely accurate. The reason this paradigm achieved such massive cultural dominance is straightforward. It is highly accessible, largely factual, and was reinforced for decades by well-meaning health advocates. The underlying biochemistry is fully valid, and the public initiatives were anchored to an objective truth. That exact composition is what renders a partial truth so incredibly resilient against scrutiny. Dismantling a concept is difficult when its core component remains demonstrably accurate.
The systemic vulnerability lies within the crucial biological steps that were completely omitted from the popular narrative. Let us analyze that hidden mechanism with the precise scientific specificity your health management demands. Calcium acts essentially as a passenger within your physiology. It possesses no autonomous steering capability. Once this mineral enters your vascular network, it lacks an innate homing beacon to guide it into the skeletal matrix. It merely follows the pathways your systemic traffic regulators dictate. The internal routing system that determines whether a mineral embeds in bone tissue or vascular walls relies entirely on a select group of cofactors. Standard dairy does not supply these specific drivers in any biologically impactful volume. Two distinct regulators hold absolute priority for your health optimization. The first is the essential macromineral magnesium, and the second is a highly specific variant of vitamin K known as vitamin K2, or mannaquinones. Think of these two nutrients as the logistics coordinators, while the calcium functions strictly as the physical freight. The scientific validation for this process is clear and easily verifiable. A comprehensive analysis featured in Frontiers in Cardiovascular Medicine detailed two specific proteins responsible for this precise physiological distribution. One is osteocalcin, which is synthesized by bone-building cells to actively capture minerals and bind them to the skeletal surface. The other is matrix GLA protein, which is produced by vascular tissue to actively prevent mineral accumulation inside your arteries. The entire outcome hinges on a single biochemical reality. Both of these critical proteins remain entirely dormant until chemically modified. The biological ignition switch required to activate them is vitamin K2. In the absence of adequate K2 levels, the protective protein shielding your cardiovascular system remains completely inactive and helpless. Examine how this couples dynamically with your systemic magnesium status. Documented research within the Journal of the American Osteopathic Association established that magnesium is an absolute prerequisite for the metabolic activation of vitamin D. Reevaluate that sequence with careful consideration. The vitamin D supplements you ingest remain largely inert until magnesium converts them into a functional form. Furthermore, it is active vitamin D that facilitates the primary absorption of minerals from your digestive tract in the first place. Therefore, the physiological pathway is not a direct line from dairy to bone. The authentic metabolic sequence begins with magnesium, which activates vitamin D, which enables mineral absorption, which is finally directed into skeletal tissue and away from vascular walls by vitamin K2. Removing magnesium compromises the sequence at the very first step. Eliminating vitamin K2 allows the cargo into the system, but leaves the environment completely devoid of traffic management. Consider a fresh analogy to solidify this concept, one that offers a distinct perspective on the mechanism. Visualize your physiology as a bustling metropolis, and imagine that every evening a massive fleet of logistical supply trucks enters the city limits. These transport vehicles represent your circulating calcium, hauling vital raw materials that the municipal infrastructure genuinely requires to maintain structural integrity. Now, imagine a pair of highly specialized traffic controllers stationed inside the central operations tower. One controller represents magnesium, and the second represents vitamin K2. Their exclusive responsibility is to evaluate every oncoming vehicle and assign its precise offloading destination. The optimal destination is the reinforced municipal warehouse, your skeletal system, where the structural elements are deployed to stabilize the city's foundation. When those controllers are alert and operating efficiently, transport vehicles are continuously routed to the warehouse, unloading their assets and reinforcing the city overnight. Now visualize that exact command tower left entirely vacant. The logistics fleet still crosses the city border, and the heavy cargo continues to flood into the infrastructure. However, there is no logistical staff present to issue route directives. Consequently, the drivers park haphazardly wherever momentum stops, and a significant portion of the fleet drifts into the narrow historical grid systems of the city. Those confined paths represent your delicate arterial walls. The transport vehicles park there, turn off their systems, and over extended periods, that unmanaged cargo hardens into a permanent dense obstruction. Channels that were designed to remain flexible, open, and responsive gradually become rigid, narrow, and structurally compromised. That is the systemic variable that plain dairy fails to address. Drinking standard milk introduces the fleet but fails to staff the control center. Unfortunately, past age 60, that specific control tower is frequently operating under critical staffing shortages. If this level of comprehensive root cause explanation is what you have been searching for, consider subscribing to ensure you do not miss the upcoming practical applications. In a moment, we will address a vital variable regarding nutrient timing that is almost universally overlooked in mainstream wellness discussions. Let us look at the statistical data, because ambiguous assertions provide no practical utility for your health strategy. Data compiled from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey reveals that approximately 48% of the domestic population consumes less magnesium from dietary sources than required for basic physiology. Nearly half the population exhibits this nutritional gap, and the deficit is most pronounced among older demographics. Ironically, this is the exact population segment continually instructed to maximize their mineral consumption. Evaluate the risk profile this creates. An individual at age 68 diligently consumes dairy and high-dose mineral supplements exactly as instructed. They are executing every recommended guideline, yet underneath the surface, the singular mineral required to run the logistics tower is severely depleted. They are systematically inundating the infrastructure with transport vehicles while simultaneously abandoning the control command center. There is an additional mechanical reason why standard liquid dairy becomes less biochemically efficient as your physiology matures. This specific issue has absolutely nothing to do with mineral mechanics. It is entirely a function of gastrointestinal evolution. The specific digestive enzyme required to cleave the primary sugar found in dairy, known as lactase, naturally diminishes as humans age. This enzymatic downregulation is exceptionally well substantiated across gastroenterology literature. Clinical portals like Medline Plus, curated by the National Library of Medicine, indicate that roughly 30 million domestic adults exhibit some degree of impaired dairy sugar processing, a vulnerability that accelerates over time. Consequently, for many mature adults, a large volume of standard milk delivers more than just unmanaged mineral transit. It frequently introduces digestive distress, fluid retention, and systemic stagnation shortly after consumption. Your digestive tract is sending a subtle signal that its current processing capacity differs fundamentally from its operational threshold decades prior. You may have already observed this phenomenon firsthand in your daily life. You consume your customary portion of dairy and subsequently experience noticeable abdominal distension and physical lethargy, attributing the discomfort to other dietary ingredients. In reality, the culprit may simply be a changing microbiome and intestinal lining, which is a universal aspect of human maturation. This experience is not an illusion, nor does it represent a personal lifestyle error on your part. The nutritional profile of the food remains stable. Your internal environment simply evolved. That shift is not a pathology, it is standard human biology. At this point, we must establish a critical boundary regarding the application of this physiological information. This analysis outlines a biological framework. It does not constitute individual clinical advice, nor is it an instruction to alter a prescribed medical regimen. Specific systemic indicators demand that you avoid self-directed experimentation and consult a primary care provider immediately. If you have a clinical history of compromised renal function, you must never introduce supplemental magnesium independently. Impaired kidneys cannot efficiently regulate and excrete excess mineral loads, which can precipitate severe cardiac complications. Similarly, if your daily routine includes cardiac medications, antihypertensives, or traditional anticoagulants, particularly those designed to interact directly with vitamin K pathways, you cannot modify your dietary or supplemental vitamin K intake arbitrarily. Doing so risks altering the therapeutic efficacy and safety parameters of your pharmaceutical prescriptions. Furthermore, if you encounter acute physical symptoms like chest constriction, rest-associated dyspnea, or localized unilateral lower extremity swelling that presents with heat or discomfort, these are not lifestyle adjustments. Those are immediate acute clinical developments requiring same-day medical evaluation. The lifestyle adjustments detailed next represent conservative whole food strategies designed to align safely with professional medical management, not to supersede it. Let us examine the cardiovascular aspect of mineral misdirection with calm, objective focus. When minerals embed themselves systematically into the endothelial lining of an artery instead of bone, the tissue forfeits its native elasticity. A high-functioning vascular pathway must expand and recoil dynamically with every single contraction of the heart, maintaining the pliable responsiveness of a pristine conduit. Conversely, a rigid mineralized vascular wall mimics a weathered, brittle tube that has suffered years of environmental exposure.
Similarly, if your daily routine includes cardiac medications, antihypertensives, or traditional anticoagulants, particularly those designed to interact directly with vitamin K pathways, You cannot modify your dietary or supplemental vitamin K intake arbitrarily. Doing so risks altering the therapeutic efficacy and safety parameters of your pharmaceutical prescriptions. Furthermore, if you encounter acute physical symptoms like chest constriction, rest-associated dyspnea, or localized unilateral lower extremity swelling that presents with heat or discomfort, these are not lifestyle adjustments. Those are immediate, acute clinical developments requiring same-day medical evaluation. The lifestyle adjustments detailed next represent conservative, whole food strategies designed to align safely with professional medical management, not to supersede it. Let us examine the cardiovascular aspect of mineral misdirection with calm, objective focus. When minerals embed themselves systematically into the endothelial lining of an artery instead of bone, the tissue forfeits its native elasticity. A high-functioning vascular pathway must expand and recoil dynamically with every single contraction of the heart, maintaining the pliable responsiveness of a pristine conduit. Conversely, a rigid, mineralized vascular wall mimics a weathered, brittle tube that has suffered years of environmental exposure. It completely loses its capacity to flex, offering nothing but stark structural resistance to fluid dynamics. Consequently, your cardiac muscle must generate significantly higher pressure against that resistance with every single cycle, indefinitely. The medical literature exploring vitamin K-dependent proteins explicitly outlines this physiological trade-off. When the specific vascular shielding protein is adequately activated, minerals are barred from entering the arterial matrix. When it is starved of its activation cofactors, that protective barrier fails entirely. The clinical irony is profound. The exact supplement consumed to preserve skeletal strength when unguided by regulatory cofactors can inadvertently promote the stiffening of your primary cardiovascular pump. That reality is not a mandate for anxiety. It is an explicit directive to properly staff your internal control tower. This realization completely reframes the entire dietary conversation. The fundamental issue was never the mineral itself, nor was it inherently the dairy matrix. The breakdown occurs when plain dairy introduces a massive influx of minerals without providing the regulatory management necessary to oversee its integration. The corrective strategy is remarkably direct and accessible. You do not need to develop an aversion to mineral-dense foods. You simply need to supply them with effective operational management. Let us map out a modernized nutritional approach sequentially, emphasizing a sustainable methodology that prioritizes whole food sources over instant transformations to complete your biology. The initial phase focuses entirely on reintegrating magnesium into your daily routine using primary dietary sources before exploring isolated supplements. The most nutrient-dense everyday options are incredibly common and accessible. A moderate serving of pumpkin seeds, a handful of almonds, or a portion of deeply cooked dark leafy greens like spinach provides excellent yields. Black beans, a modest portion of high-percentage dark chocolate, and standard bananas also offer valuable contributions to your daily intake. If you execute only one single modification following this analysis, ensure you introduce one magnesium-dense whole food to your meals every day. That single habitual addition initiates the physical restaffing of your metabolic command center. The second phase involves ending the habit of consuming liquid dairy in isolation, particularly as a large, standalone volume on an empty digestive tract. Modifying your lifestyle does not require eliminating dairy products entirely. It requires ending the expectation that plain milk can serve as a comprehensive nutritional solution on its own. Two straightforward dietary adjustments can optimize this process effectively. First, pivot your choices toward cultured and traditional fermented options such as plain yogurt, kefir, or traditionally aged cheeses. The natural fermentation process significantly reduces the primary sugars that induce gastrointestinal distress. Additionally, specific fermented dairy structures naturally synthesize vitamin K2, delivering both the structural freight and the traffic coordinator within the same food matrix.
Second, whenever you choose to consume standard dairy, ensure it is integrated alongside a balanced meal rather than introduced as an isolated, overwhelming wave of minerals that your system must process simultaneously. The third phase involves purposefully introducing direct dietary sources of vitamin K2. The most concentrated source available globally is a traditional fermented soybean dish known as natto, though its distinct profile means most Western consumers will omit it, which is perfectly acceptable. Excellent alternative yields can be secured through high-quality aged cheeses, pastured egg yolks, and the exact dark leafy greens you are already incorporating to fulfill your magnesium requirements. Observe the efficient nutritional synergy occurring within that food selection. Deep leafy greens deliver a dual benefit by supplying both magnesium and the broader vitamin K family simultaneously. Natural food matrices consistently bundle these specific regulatory cofactors together. Your only task is to consistently include them on your plate. The fourth phase involves managing your vitamin D status accurately while respecting the established biological sequence. Vitamin D cannot execute its physiological role in isolation. If you maintain a supplemental vitamin D routine under medical supervision, which remains highly advisable for a significant percentage of mature adults, you must ensure your magnesium intake is sufficient to support it. As osteopathic clinical trials verified, magnesium serves as the primary chemical catalyst that converts vitamin D into its active state. Consuming an isolated vitamin D capsule while running an empty magnesium reserve is identical to inserting an ignition key into a vehicle without a hand available to turn it. The fifth phase requires modulating the pacing of your nutritional intake. Your gastrointestinal tract is structurally incapable of processing massive singular deliveries of minerals efficiently. Human physiology adapts far more successfully to modest distributed doses spaced throughout the waking hours rather than a solitary immense volume. Therefore, split your daily mineral and dairy intake into smaller portions, allocate a modest amount to your morning routine and a secondary portion later in the day. Smaller, predictable deliveries coupled with active regulatory cofactors ensure your skeletal warehouse actually absorbs the incoming material. If you prefer to have this comprehensive methodology, including structured food inventories, basic monitoring templates, and optimized grocery references, organized for immediate implementation, the entire framework has been compiled into a concise manual titled the Drainage Protocol. This resources translates clinical concepts into highly practical steps designed to be executed systematically. The access link is located directly in the media description below for those seeking structured guidance, though it is entirely optional. Every single foundational tool required to initiate this adjustment has already been delivered in this presentation. Let us revisit an honest, objective caveat because transparency is paramount in health communication. The intricate relationship connecting mineral intake, cardiovascular structures, and skeletal density remains an active, evolving domain of modern medical science, and individual clinical trials occasionally yield contrasting data points. What the broader body of research universally confirms is a foundational law of nutrition. Minerals require their biological partners to function safely. Magnesium and vitamin K2 are indispensable for guiding structural cargo to its proper destination. Furthermore, a substantial percentage of mature individuals maintain a chronic, unaddressed deficiency in daily magnesium intake. That summary represents a highly defensible conservative consensus, and it provides more than enough clinical justification to optimize your evening meal without relying on exaggerated health promises. Let us focus intensely on the most vital segment of this entire discussion, as understanding this nuance prevents a well-intentioned health shift from becoming an adverse clinical event. The physiological strategies outlined here do not apply uniformly to every single individual. There are specific medical profiles where standard, traditional mineral protocols remain absolutely mandatory, and deviating from them independently could jeopardize your health. Let us establish those clinical boundaries explicitly. If a physician has formally diagnosed you with advanced bone density loss and initiated a highly structured high-dose calcium and vitamin D therapeutic protocol, You must never alter that regimen based on digital media. Instead, bring this specific physiological framework to your next clinical consultation and discuss integrating magnesium and vitamin K2 as supportive cofactors rather than replacements. Your primary medical prescription remains your foundational directive. As stated previously, if you navigate chronic renal issues, self-directed adjustments to your magnesium intake are strictly contraindicated. Compromised renal filtration cannot safely process sudden increases in mineral concentrations, which can directly destabilize your cardiac rhythm. This matter must be managed exclusively by your nephrologist, not a dietary guide. If your medical regimen features traditional anticoagulants dependent on vitamin K pathways, you must avoid sudden spikes in vitamin K-dense foods. Maintaining a highly consistent, predictable baseline intake of those nutrients is what allows your clinical team to keep your medication levels within a safe therapeutic range. Drastic dietary shifts can cause volatile changes in your lab values, so consult your prescribing physician before modifying your K2 intake. Finally, if you are navigating a state of being significantly underweight, physically frail, or struggling to maintain adequate caloric intake, a common challenge in the advanced decades of life, arbitrarily removing an accessible, energy-dense, protein-rich option like dairy can result in net negative health outcomes. For your specific physiology, the ideal strategy is not the reduction of dairy, but rather the enrichment of that dairy with its missing regulatory cofactors, managed alongside a provider who understands your comprehensive medical history. Observe the philosophy governing this information. This is not a rigid blind rule to adopt without thought. It is an explanation of a biological mechanism designed to empower your understanding, allowing you to collaborate intelligently with your physician within your unique clinical landscape. That represents the distinct difference between merely receiving an instruction and being provided the comprehensive context required to truly comprehend your own biology.
As a mature adult, you are entirely capable of navigating structural nuance, even if traditional public relations campaigns suggested otherwise. Let us synthesize this entire physiological sequence clearly so it remains permanently retained. Skeletal tissue requires structural minerals, and dairy products contain them in high density. However, that cargo possesses no intrinsic guidance system, and past age 60, your internal logistics team is frequently understaffed. Magnesium is the catalyst that activates the vitamin D required for initial mineral absorption. Vitamin K2 is the switch that activates the specific proteins responsible for anchoring that absorbed mineral into bone matrices while actively defending your vascular walls against accumulation. Standard dairy supplies the freight but omits both logistical managers. The solution is simply to reintegrate those coordinators by incorporating targeted greens, seeds, nuts, traditional fermented options, and eggs into your routine, while distributing your meals throughout the day rather than overwhelming your system all at once. That is the complete approach to health that the simplified marketing campaigns never fully articulated. To begin tonight, select one small, manageable action step before resting. Identify a single magnesium-dense whole food and commit to placing it on your plate tomorrow. If your habit involves consuming a large standalone portion of plain milk, commit to substituting it tomorrow with plain cultured yogurt or kefir, or at the very least, ensure it is consumed alongside a solid meal. Take a piece of paper and write down a single, clear question to present at your next clinical exam. Should I incorporate magnesium and vitamin K2 to optimize my bone health, and is it completely safe alongside my current prescriptions? Asking that specific targeted question within a clinical setting can generate far more long-term value for your systemic longevity than purchasing another carton of dairy ever will. Before concluding, I would appreciate your input, as your specific demographics directly inform the educational materials developed next. Please share your current decade in the public forum below, whether you are navigating your 60s, 70s, or 80s. Past the age of 70, metabolic variables, renal dynamics, intestinal processing, and pharmaceutical profiles become highly individualized, and understanding the precise audience watching allows future insights to remain highly targeted. I look forward to reviewing your responses. Remember this foundational takeaway as you move forward. Your historical lifestyle choices were not incorrect. You were simply operating with an incomplete set of instructions. Minerals represent the cargo, while magnesium and vitamin K2 represent the indispensable logistics team. Consuming isolated plain dairy in your later decades provides the transport fleet but leaves the operations tower completely vacant. You do not need to avoid the food. You simply need to staff the facility, introduce the mineral cofactors, distribute your portions, communicate transparently with your medical team, and give your nutritional assets the precise direction they need to succeed. Protect your cardiovascular system diligently. We will explore the next phase of metabolic health in our upcoming segment.